Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Dave Thompson. I'm a volunteer here at the Palm Springs Air Museum in California. We're here at the museum this morning along with Dr. Marvin Leaf, Harry Ziegler, and Bob Andrade, all fellow volunteers. And this morning we're going to interview David Foster. David was a Royal Navy pilot for the British during World War II, served in North Africa and in the Pacific. He also has the distinction of founding the COLGATE DINAH Golf Tournament here in the Valley, of which is of great interest to all of us. So, David, nice to have you here.
David, nice to be here.
Okay, David. And today, by the way, is December 16th, the year 2002. Now, I believe you were born in London, England.
I was born in London in 1920, and both my parents were American-born. My father from Evanston, Illinois, and my mother from Greenfield, Indiana. And my father came over with my mother in 1913, and I think the reason he came over was that he was a little fed up with his father, who was head of the Foster Forbes Glass Company, for making him a salesman and working him too hard. Also, he'd had great memories of England because he was on the 1908 Olympic swimming team and gained a gold medal in the relays. And also, they trained in Brighton, and Brighton at that time was a very thriving Regency city, and so I think he realized that he had seen a place where an opportunity would be good.
Okay, and it was May 24th, I believe, 1920 was your birthday.
My birthday, yes.
Now, tell me about when he was training, and there was an Australian channel swimmer that he was training against.
Yes, they were asked while they were training down in Brighton, in the sea, in the channel. They came up and said, any volunteers that would pace the Australian swimmer who was attempting to swim the channel? And my father said yes, and so they put him in next to a boat, and he was pacing the Australian, and he'd been a long-distance swimmer as well as a short distance in the lakes off Chicago, and so he could swim great distances, and he was doing very well, and he saw the coast of France ahead, and just about then they sort of tapped him on the shoulder and said, you've got to come out because the Australian has given up and the attempt is over. So that was his experience of channel swimming.
So was it when did your parents move to, and what was your father's name?
Robert Foster.
Okay, and your mother's name?
She was Josephine.
And what was her maiden name?
Ramsey.
Okay, and she was from Indiana, I believe you said.
She was from Indiana.
Greenfield, yeah.
Yes, her father was a lawyer, and he became mayor of Chicago at one time. And I never had the pleasure of meeting him. I don't think he ever came over to England. And so that was their background.
So what did your father do in England then after you moved over there?
Well, what happened when he came back from the Olympic and went back to Chicago or Evanston, he was a great local hero, as anybody would be in those days, and he thought, well, he then had to go out and be a salesman after he'd finished his education, and so he found a willing person in the B.J. Johnson Soap Company, and he also, Charlie Channel, was the manager of a new product called Oceda Mop. So anyway, he took the Oceda Mop, got the agency for England and Western Europe, and settled down to sell this new household product. And he was, I think, a little short of money, and he managed to have a friendship with Gordon Selfridge, who was just then starting the first chain department store in London, which of course is still there and famous for on Oxford Street. And so anyway, things went fairly well, but of course the war started, and he got over to begin with before that had happened.
The World War I started.
And World War I started. And so in 1914, really, he was based back in England and couldn't get around to the agencies that he had formed in Sweden and Belgium and France and Italy. So anyway, that went fairly well, but he was not happy with it. So when he went back, I think 1915, he went back to Chicago again. And he then took up the offer had been made with Mr. Johnson to also take Palmolive soap, which was a newly milled toilet soap, and joined up with Oceda Mop and the same agency arrangements. That was a great success. And so another time he went back, much richer, with a Rolls Royce and a chauffeur, and gave Charlie Channel his agency back because he felt that Palmolive was too big to have the Oceda as well. So that is what has happened. He sold the Rolls Royce to Douglas Fairbanks, and the chauffeur disappeared. So that was the start.
And how did that end up becoming Colgate?
Well, the Palmolive Company, as a separate company, was doing extremely well, and as you know, built the tallest building in Chicago, and they were all for expanding, and so they took over the Colgate Company, which was formed in 1806 and was mainly dental cream. Family, not very successful. And then, of course, the crash came, and the Palmolive managers all were fairly well extended, and so the Colgates, who had been paid stock in Palmolive mainly, took over Palmolive, and it became Colgate Palmolive. Then later on, the Peet Brothers, a firm in Kansas City, was acquired. It was mainly laundry soaps, powders, and the rest. So then it became Colgate Palmolive Peet.
So when in 18 or whatever it was, early 1800s, when it was formed, was the family named Colgate? Where'd that name come from?
From a family.
Oh, they were, okay. And where were they?
They were in the East. I don't know whether they're in New Jersey or, but of course they formed the Colgate University.
Okay, that's what
and so they were. And there was always a Colgate on the board right up until 1965, something like that.
Okay. So where did you grew up in London then, when you were a boy?
I grew up and went to preparatory school, which was formed by Nancy Astor down in Uckfield in Sussex, and that was really based on her Christian Science background. And my mother had adopted that. She was divorced from my father in 1927. He remained a playboy most of his life and liked nightclubs and the rest of it, and she did not. So they separated quite amicably, and although my father did marry again in the 30s to an American actress, Barbara Newbury, he really still had my mother as his.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just a motion. Well, okay, go ahead.
So that was the situation, and from there I went on to Stowe, which was a school which was again fairly. It didn't start till 1923, and it took place in the country estates of the Duke of Buckingham. It's a most beautiful building, which has just been renovated. So Stowe was very modern, not some of the traditions that the Eatons and Rugbys and Oundles and the rest had. It was more pleasant, and the headmaster was a great person, and he expected you to be sensible, and they didn't have a lot of traditions of pulling people in and beating them just for the sake of keeping traditions going. So from Stowe, I graduated to go to Cambridge, Gonville and Caius College.
And how old were you then?
I was 18.
Okay.
And then I had a year there of economics, got my economic tripos, and was starting my second year of history when Hitler was beginning to invade parts of Europe, and that was really the only conversation piece people had. What the hell is he going to do next, etc. And
what were you and your friends or your family's thoughts about the appeasement at that time that Chamberlain, his ideas?
Well, Chamberlain was always looked on as a fairly weak character. And for a year or 2 years before that, Winston Churchill had been canvassing around the country, giving his ideas of how one should react to Hitler. And so it was really no surprise when Chamberlain, after Munich, after retired, and Churchill took over.
I think you had developed a love for the game of golf. Was that when you were in school at Cambridge or at Stowe, or?
He became an extremely good amateur golfer. I mean, he.
Your father, you mean?
Yes, he developed into at Coombe Hill, which was his main club. They even tried to stop him winning the monthly medal by making him +5. He still managed to win. And the only trouble with his golf is that he learned it and played it at Coombe Hill, which is in Surrey, just about 7 miles from Hyde Park Corner, because it was very narrow. And he never, therefore, hit the ball very far. It was always direction counted, not length. So he started playing in the British Amateur and also in the British Open. His qualification for his handicap was low enough to be able to do that. And I don't think he missed an Open or an Amateur all the way up through till World War II. It was more of a social event in those days, and the amateurs that used to play were not necessarily the best golfers, but they were the best social people. And they had a great time, and of course all of them nearly had a pro from their club. And my father's was a pro called Archie Compston, who was really about even when Jones was winning Opens and Amateurs, was about the second best pro at that time. And they played in the London foursomes together and got into the final twice. They didn't win it. And so it was the golf was a good social thing for him, as well as being a very good local club player.
And that's when you got interested in golf?
Well, I started when I was going up to the club all the time, and I started when I was about 12 years old.
Yeah. So tell me what you were doing on, I guess it'd be September 1, 1939?
September 1, I was in Normandy in a house, very lovely house, which was rented by another Stoic family, South Africans, a fellow called George Turner. And they were staying with me at that place another Stowe and Cambridge fellow called John Phillips. So John Phillips and I decided on September the 3rd, that was a weekend, a Sunday, to make it back to England. And we had as our companion a woman who lived down in this part in Normandy called Denise McKenna, and her daughter Virginia McKenna became quite a well-known film star. Anyway, Denise McKenna was very upset by this business of having to go back to England, and so John Phillips and I sort of took turns in trying to calm her down and take a rest, and we got on board the ship, and we would take turns, and when we were off duty with McKenna, we'd go down and have a scotch or something like that. And eventually we arrived, and in the train we stopped before we got into Waterloo, right opposite on the Thames, right opposite the House of Parliament, and we could see the light was on in the tower, which is on when the session is when it is in session. And sure enough, that was when the war was declared.
Mm-hmm. So what did you do then? I believe you joined the...
Well, I think all of us then, we volunteered. I mean, although I had dual nationality, my American nationality was not really valid for me. I was educated in England, and I'd been to the States a couple of times, but so I volunteered, and actually I volunteered staying with down in Wroughton, down in Wiltshire, with a fellow called Peter Hastings, whose mother was a trainer of horses, of steeplechase horses. Anyway, they told us, no, well, you, David Foster, you are going back to Cambridge, so you volunteer there, and for Peter Hastings, who was going to Oxford, you volunteer there. So we then went into our universities and volunteered.
You volunteered for the Navy, did you?
Well, I was going to volunteer for the Army. I had no notions. No, excuse me. I was going to volunteer for the Navy because my sister had married a naval officer who was a lieutenant on board the Glowworm destroyer, which was at that time in the Mediterranean. And so I thought, that's fine. Well, as I was queuing up, there was past a desk, and there an officer was sitting, and he beckoned me over, and he said, have you thought of joining the Fleet Air Arm? And I said, no, I've never heard of it. What is it? So he said, well, it's flying off carriers, and you're a naval officer. And I said, you mean I get wings on my chest? He said, no, it's on your sleeve. but you get wings. So I said, well, that sounds wonderful, being a naval officer and flying. That could be great. So I volunteered for the Fleet Air Arm. And
you had never flown before or had
never flown.
aspirations
No.
for flying? I wanted to back up to the glowworm. That's a kind of a interesting story about that ship.
Yes, the glowworm was I forget what class destroyer, but it was one of the larger destroyers, and it was in the fleet heading towards Norway in 1940. I forget the month, and a rating fell overboard, and the glowworm stopped to pick him up. Whereupon, out of the sort of foggy area, the two German ships, the DINAH, and I forget the name of the other one, but anyway.
Battle cruisers.
Battle cruisers.
Almost like battleships.
And of course, they sunk the glowworm. The glowworm's captain was very keen on getting the Victoria Cross, which is the highest medal that you could get in warfare in England. And so when things were really going bad and the ship had been hit several times, he decided to ram one of the battle cruisers. So that's what he did, and I think only 32 of the crew of 150 survived, and one was not my brother-in-law. He died. So that, I suppose, was why I wanted to join the Navy at that time, and it was one of the first British ships that was sunk in the war.
Right. Ask the question. Well, when he rammed the German battle cruiser, what happened to the German ship? Was it damaged seriously?
Not seriously.
So, where did you take your training then, for your flying, first flying experiences and stuff?
Well, the first training happened in Belfast, at the aerodrome in Belfast, and that was just normal flying, not naval or anything like that. So that was where I did that. That would be from April 1st to May, when I had got my wings. And then after that, we started flying training, naval flying training, and most of those exercises were up in Scotland. At Crail, it was for torpedo dropping and the rest, and then at Arbroath, which is farther north, it was for deck landing and the rest of it.
And what were some of the planes that you flew?
Oh, the planes were very old, were mostly biplanes, Harts and Hinds and things that had probably been in the First World War. And we were flying small Magisters at that time.
How about, did you ever fly the Swordfish?
What's that?
Did you ever fly the Swordfish?
Oh, the Swordfish then was, of course, the main operating plane, and of course we learned to fly that. And that, I think, was the main plane that we all thought we were going to have to fly in the war.
And was it a torpedo plane or a bomber?
It was a torpedo.
Plane, right, yeah. And they were at Toronto, I believe, the Italian fleet. They were very instrumental.
They were Swordfish, yes.
They were Swordfish, too.
And they carried torpedoes, and they were very good flying. Their maneuverability was good, but it was an open cockpit, and it was pretty cold and wet sometimes, and so we were fairly gratified when the Fairey Albacore followed the Swordfish and had complete cover for crew.
This might be a good time to go over to the the albacore, and we'll talk a little bit about it. So let's put that on pause. And okay, this one. Okay, so when did you start training on albacores then?
That would be about 1940. Would be about June or July 1940.
And did you get your orders about that time then? Orders to your first duty?
Well, that would go on, and then round about November, we would go to Greenwich to be made officers. Okay. And discard our naval ratings.
Can you tell me something about your uniform? How?
Well, you know, when we first lined up and I decided to switch from the Navy to the Fleet Air Arm, I envisaged that we would be made officers straight away from our university, as was happening in '39 for the Army. So we were rather surprised when we got down to Royal Naval Barracks in Portsmouth that we were just one of many naval ratings in bell-bottom trousers and the top, and but they did one thing with us. Because they thought we were special, they gave us a white armband around the arm, which I presume was supposed to warn people not to hit us in the pub. But the thing that happened is that another naval rating came up to me in a pub and said, "What, you've given up already? You've surrendered just because you've got a white armband on?" So that was part of the uniform we wore.
By rating, you're talking about an enlisted person.
Enlisted, yeah.
Now, in London, you did some of your training around London too, I believe, and you went through the Blitz.
Yeah.
Do you recall? Tell us a little bit about what that was like, the Blitz.
Well, the Blitz was, you can't describe it really. I mean, you just hear the air raid sirens go off, and you would then wait, and then you'd hear the explosion of the bombs, and sometimes they were fairly distant in a part of East London, and it wasn't often that they came necessarily to the west. My father had become president of the American Club in London, which was quite a thriving organization on Piccadilly, and he was about the only Colgate-Palmolive employee in Europe who had declined E.H. Little, who was the chairman, invitation to come back to the States and accept a job in the States. They were all U.S. citizens. And so he remained and would be in the American Club in the evenings, and had a good barman that knew how to mix martinis. And so you really, the bombing could be incidental, and it could be very, very frightening, obviously. And you would often go down into one of the underground subway stations where everybody who wanted to could bring a bed or a blanket or a mattress and lie down and sleep there. And obviously you never wanted to do that if you had a decent bed and a flat in London. So it was, yes, it was very frightening, and you saw the damage that was being done. It was quite incredible. But I mean, I was then in the Navy. I was then, having been at Greenwich. Now, when I was at Greenwich, there we slept down in the sort of basement, and this is in the basement of a palace or college that had been built hundreds of years before, and we didn't want to live in the upstairs because there we thought it was very liable to be bombed. So they put us downstairs. And I was lying there the first night that we were in Greenwich, and lying against a stone wall, and I looked up, and looking into my eyes was a river rat about that long. So I decided that I would go home to my mother's apartment or flat and sleep there rather than sleep down in this Greenwich.
Worried more about the river rats than the German bombs. Right?
That's right.
I think you managed to play a little golf even during that time?
Yes, my father still would play Saturday and Sunday, and because Coombe Hill was very near to London, it was sort of about the kind of place that the German planes would jettison their bombs if they hadn't been able to use them, or if and so there were lots of craters on the Coombe Hill course, and some of them after the war were turned into bunkers because strategically they were very good.
To making your own sand trap.
Yeah.
You had shown me something here from another golf course, I think, that they had posted. And I'm just going to read some of this stuff. This is posted at a golf course during the Blitz. Rule 1, players are asked to collect bomb and shrapnel splinters to save causing damage to the mowing machines. 2, during gunfire or bombing, players may take shelter without penalty. 3, the positions of known delayed action bombs are marked by red flags at a reasonable, but not guaranteed, safe distance therefrom. 4, a ball moved by enemy action may be replaced, or if destroyed or lost, another ball may be dropped no nearer the hole without penalty. 5, a player whose stroke is affected by the simultaneous explosion of a bomb may play another ball. Penalty, 1 stroke.
That was at a golf course. Royal Wimbledon was right opposite Coombe Hill on the other side of the Kingston bypass.
Okay. So did you get assigned to a squadron then next?
Well, after Greenwich, we then, as I say, we then went up to Scotland to do finish some of the training, and then we were quite a few of us were then sent to Egypt to join carriers who were then which were then operating in the Mediterranean. So we went on the Georgic, which was an old White Star liner, stopped at Freetown.
So the Georgic was like the Titanic. They all ended up ICs, the White Star lines,
Yes.
right?
And didn't stop at Cape Town because the Australian division coming round from Australia to England had made a mess of Cape Town. So they avoided Cape Town. We stopped at Durban instead, and then up at Aden, and then into Port Suez. And when we disembarked from the Georgic to get in a train to go up to Decatur or near Alexandria, the Georgic was bombed and was beached, and was there all the war beached. And as we were going in the train alongside the canal, we saw the Formidable, which I was supposed to join, coming down on the way to Norfolk because she'd been badly damaged off Crete, and the Illustrious and the Formidable both. So when we got to the naval base, Decatur, which was just west of Alexandria. There were no carriers in the Mediterranean to join.
I want to back up just a little bit on the Georgic. You had told me, I believe, that you had met this this lady. She was a Wren officer.
Yeah.
And what is a Wren, first of all, and tell me a little bit about her.
Well, Wren is a naval, woman naval.
That's W-R-E-N.
Yeah, officer.
Okay.
They were going to out to Colombo. They were going to Ceylon, and so we saw the last of them was in Aden. They disembarked at Aden, took another ship, and then the other person who I don't think I mentioned to you, who was on board, was an admiral. I think it was Sir Michael Arbuthnot, who was the father of a Stowe boy, and they discovered that myself and another Stoic called Ian Whitesmith were passengers, and so he invited us to play bridge with him and Lady Arbuthnot. And my bridge was not very good, and I trumped Lady Arbuthnot's card, whatever it was at the time. But it was very comfortable. The liner, it was just like being on board, except the cabins were made for about 6 or 8 people with bunks rather than just normal beds.
Did those women make it to Ceylon?
They made it to Ceylon, and then later that year, they were on their way back, I think probably to come into to Egypt, where it was more important, the Mediterranean, and the ship was sunk, and the Wren that I was in love with died, and her sister was there as well, so they both perished in that disaster.
Yeah. So now you're in Egypt, I guess, and with no ship to go to. The Formidable is gone.
That's right.
And I think you got sick, didn't you?
Well, no, they didn't know what to do with us. I mean, the flying operation commander, and I forget his name, but he had been one of the pilots at Taranto, so he was a flyer, and so I was standing next to a friend of mine who'd been on the Georgic called John Wilson, and so this fellow, this commander said, "Now, would anybody like to volunteer to go down to our supply base at Fayed and ferry planes that are down there for maintenance back to the squadrons?" And so we sort of nudged each other and said, "Come on, let's step forward." So we stepped forward, thought we might as well be doing something, rather than waiting for something else. So we went down to Fayed, which was this new base, a big airfield had been built to take care of all the maintenance of planes for the naval squadrons. And that, of course, was an area that was still being bombed. And one night we'd come back. What we would do, we would fly the planes up to either Dakar with squadrons, or there's another airport by Suez. Sorry, but not by Suez, by anyway, where another squadron used to be. And then we'd have our parachutes, and we'd take those, get in the train, and go back to Abukir, and then we'd go and walk to Fayed, which was about a 7-mile walk. Well, we got out, Abukir was being bombed, and the train stopped and was not going to go on. So we got out of the train and walked another couple of miles along to Abukir, and then down in the canal zone to Fayed. And when I was walking down there, I definitely felt that I had been bitten by a mosquito. And so within a week or so, I came down with malaria, and I went into the local army hospital, tented army hospital. And what happened there was that the malaria took its course, and when it started to go down in temperature and the rest of it, my temperature went up, and the doctors found that I had paratyphoid as well. And so I was in hospital there for 11 weeks, and they found eventually that the paratyphoid had been caused by germs from a Egyptian worker who had been pushed or fallen into the water tank and was poisoning the water. So that was a problem. We went to had a, as well as the 11 weeks, went to off Tel Aviv. There was a camp there on the sea for recuperation. Mm-hmm. The thing that really was a problem, of course, when I got back to Decatur, I couldn't join a squadron. I was not fit to fly for 6 months. So they sent me as an operations officer out to one of the fighter squadrons in the desert to just plan operations and fired. And so I didn't really join the squadron 821 until after I had finished my 6 months, and then had to do a retraining at Decatur. So it was quite some delay that was caused.
And Rommel's Africa Corps was
it was very active at that time, and I joined 821, which was an Albacore squadron, and it was then in one of the airfields near Mardin Bagouche, and then the next thing that happened is that Rommel made an attack, advance. He couldn't get past the New Zealanders, and so things were fairly quiet for a time. And then we went into a ham scene, which is one of these fog that they had in those days out there, which was absolutely complete. You couldn't see anything. And there were rumors that Rommel was trying to take another route to get to Cairo. So when we went up at night, we were supposed to find it and illuminate it so that the RAF Wellington bombers could bomb it. Well, where they told us to go, we dropped some flares and there was nothing there. And so my observer, a fellow called Cooper, he said, well, why don't we, to hell with where they tell us to be, why don't we go further south? So I said, okay. So we went further south and went where there were supposed to be minefields, and then we dropped a flare and we illuminated the whole leaguer of tanks and other equipment going very fast. All the sand was all blowing behind them, and Rommel was taking this route through minefields to get to Cairo. So we dropped flares, and then, as instructed, we fired fairy lights, and that meant that it was a special target. So the Wellington started bombing it, and that went on for that whole of that night, and of course the day bombers took it over. And then that really, Rommel couldn't make it that way either, so then his retreat started. And the retreat started at the same time that Montgomery, the 8th Army, was building up forces to make his advance. So we had to keep the enemy planes down, so we had to really make night bombing of their airfields. And also we then found that they were retreating, and again we dropped some flares and found that sort of parallel with the desert road, which went all the way through to Benghazi, there was columns of German tanks that were fleeing in the desert south of the main road, but invisible because there were some hills invisible to the British forces. So that was a very good target, and so we illuminated that, and the bombers came. And so that really was more or less the end of the 8th Army's problems in Egypt. The next thing, of course, is we were sent to Malta as the bombing in Egypt had finished.
I think you told me one time that on a flight your plane caught on fire.
Oh yes.
Tell me about that.
No, we were going up. It was well, I think I should tell you two things. I think this last time I volunteered was the last time I volunteered in the whole war. But anyway, as the British forces had been, and the RAF had been retreating when Rommel was advancing, the report came that there was an albacore on an airfield there which they said was serviceable. So my Marine Major CO said, anybody volunteer to go and bring that plane back? And I stupidly said, yes, I will, I'll go. So I got a lift from a squadron leader, RF, who was in charge of the flare path, which they were laying out on an airfield which they had abandoned, but it was the nearest for Blenheims to fly from there to Malta without having to refuel. So that was the night that they were sending off half a dozen of these planes. So when I was passing the airfield that I had to get to, which was nearer to Decatur, and so I asked the RAF squadron leader, could he drop me off? And he said, I can only drop you off here. I can't come onto the airfield with you because all the lights and everything we've got to continue. So I said, okay. So I got out and started walking on this deserted airfield until I found this albacore. And got in the albacore, and I brought with me a box of starter cartridges. But when I started them up, and I thought, well, I better taxi down towards the desert road and then back and just see what length I had to do it. So anyway, I did that, taxied back, and then I took off towards the Mediterranean into the wind, and I got up to about 50 feet above that, and I looked at the gauge, and the thing was falling. This plane was not serviceable, and it was another 10 minutes flying along the road, and then the plane, the whole engine stopped, broke. So I turned again off the road towards the Mediterranean, just sand, and landed, and got out, and no damage, a very good landing, but why not? And I heard some shouts, and an army sergeant and a private were there with guns, thinking I was an enemy plane. So I had to persuade them that I was okay. So they said, well, you better go to the road and get a lift back. So I went to the road, and while I was when I was taking off, a regiment of small British tanks had gone by, and I was told that was the last of the British Army. So I thought, well, this isn't much good. And then a truck came along, and it happened to be the naval people who had taken me out there and had gone on with the RAF squadron leader. And so I got into that truck, the back of it, and they were on their way back to Decatur. And we had to stop and get off the road a couple of times, and it was being strafed by German fighter planes. And so we arrived back there. And I don't think the major believed anything that I told him. In other words, I don't think he basically thought that I'd tried to take this plane off. And I told him what I'd done, and he said, yes, okay, Foster, well done. You know, we've got other things now. You get with your observer. You've got to fly. We've got some, you know. So anyway, it just so happened that a couple of nights after that, I was flying up there, and then my observer said there's a fire in the back. So I landed this albacore almost in exactly the same position I'd landed the other ones. So there were two planes that I had abandoned. And I think that's flying over it from then on. We used to use them as target practice, and I think then the major realized that I had tried to take the plane back.
You had told me you would fly at night pretty much all the time, and the Germans had night fighters up. And what were your tactics against those German night fighters? I think you told me one time you did the wrong thing.
Yeah, well, we knew how maneuverable. I mean, the reason that we had taken over really a pathfinder's job for the Wellingtons, who before that were dropping their own flares and then going and then try to come back and find the target again. And it became very obvious that we could sit over the target and drop flares, and because we were so maneuverable, we were continually over it. And so the rule came out from the RAF that the RAF bombers did not drop flares. They relied on our squadrons and to do the illuminating of the targets. This worked pretty well. Of course, then we were a fairly obvious target for any German night fighter, because there we were dropping flares and circling. And so the first time that I was attacked, I instinctively tried to get more speed. And in other words, I put the nose down and I went towards the ground. It wasn't until I was down only about 50 feet above the ground that I did the tight 90-degree turn, which was your defense against a faster plane firing at you. Well, the only trouble was that I had minimized the difference in the speed by trying to go faster. And I was attacked several times after that, and I knew the job. I mean, the minute that my navigator said, there's a Ju-88 turning behind you, I said, all right, let me know when it's about to fire, when it's in a position. And when that happened, I would then slow down, in some cases put the flaps down, and make very slow but very tight turns. And they they couldn't follow me. Their first shooting would fly off, and then they could never get round again, and so they would give up. I mean, they just said, to hell with it, you know, we can't follow this plane around. So that was a defense, and that's why these planes were so good for the job that we found ourselves doing, which was pathfinding for the RAF.
So basically, the faster German plane would go past you.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was your only really only defense.
Yeah.
There was Operation Chocolate. Tell me a little bit about that.
We had an albacore with a long-range tank in the place that there would have been a navigator. In other words, so there would just be two places for crew, the pilot and air gunner, or navigator, whichever it was. And there weren't many of these, but we had one of them. So they said, you are going to go on this Operation Chocolate. So we gathered at an airfield near Cairo, and we then took off with 2 or 3 big transport planes in attendance, which contained Marines and supplies of gasoline. In other words, we were going to have to refuel. And so we flew about 200 miles behind the enemy lines and landed, and then waited for the night to come, refueled. The Marines were in the planes, formed a defense. And so then we took off at night and flew more or less directly north to attack a convoy which was approaching Benghazi, which Rommel had taken in the attack. Tobruk. The British had evacuated Tobruk, and the Germans were bringing troops into Tobruk. So we did that, and then we bombed I think there were about 5 merchant ships, and we hit the one that we intended to, but we didn't see any real damage. It didn't blow it up or anything like that. And then turned and headed east back to Alexandria, to Decatur. So that was Operation Chocolate.
And then you were in Malta for a while after that. What kind of missions were you flying from there?
Well, I felt there it was a little unfair, because I was due by then. The months that I had accumulated with the flying, but also with the illness, made me due to go back to UK. So I had more or less decided that, not that but I thought that my CO had decided that as well. And I'm rather surprised when he again said to me, Foster, so-and-so flight leader is ill. You'll have to take his place and fly his flight to Malta. And I felt a little bloody-minded about it. But anyway, we went first to Benghazi, landed, and then the next day we went on the next night rather, we flew through to Malta and landed there. And then I just became a same member of the squadron, except I was in charge of somebody else's flight, and I had a different navigator and air gunner. And we had there a couple of operations, another attack against another convoy of merchant ships, and then another important job to mine the harbor of a port, and we started to do this, and the weather was awful. And we then found out, as we were taking off, I mean, before we took off, that the reason we were doing this at night is that the RAF, the Blenheims, had decided the weather was too bad for them to fly, and so they had not done the job of mining this port. So we went off, about 6 of us with mines, and the major, a Marine, turned back, and I went on, and I'm sure some of the others went on, and we dropped our mines in the harbor. And then to get back, I've never been flying in such bad weather. I thought I could get above it, so I tried to climb above it, and then I couldn't do that. It just were clouds way up there, and beyond the albacore's height. And then so I said, well, I go down to sea level. So I went down to sea level, and that was not much better, but at least I felt more at home there than up in the high clouds. And then after that, the squadron doctor sort of took pity on me. I mean, when I say that, he knew that that I was due to go back to UK.
I think it's beyond that.
Oh, okay. That's
Tournament at Coombe with the Prince. The reason that he got to know him really was that Prince of Wales had the same golf pro, Archie Compston. So of course that Archie Compston would have my father make up 3 or 4 play with him, and by that time, so
Where did your dad meet the Prince of Wales, did you say?
what?
Where did your father meet the Prince of Wales?
Well, Coombe Hill, same pro.
When I was in England, I stayed at Castlecombe. Is that right nearby? A town called Castlecombe, C-O-O-M-B-E. I stayed there when I was in England for a while. Is that right nearby?
Castlecombe.
Same area?
Yeah.
Okay, David, let's talk about when you went back to London, and I know you went to Buckingham Palace. Tell me about that.
Well, I went back to London after being in Malta and had some leave, and then I was put on as sort of the rest between, put on a campaign called the Wings for Victory campaign, whereas myself and 2 or 3 RAF officers, pilots, and we would go to factories and we would get to the tea break, coffee break, and we'd talk to the employees and tell them about the war and what we'd done, and this was all in an effort for the government to sell bonds, and it was called Wings for Victory, and that lasted for 3 months, and it was quite an interesting operation, because you would go on at night, you'd go into a cinema, and they would, before the main film, and they would put the lights on, and you'd give you a little 5 or 10 minutes speech, and it was quite interesting because you know, the newspapers weren't either through security or just the lack of paper, perhaps, were not giving the people much information about the war overseas. There was enough about the bombing and the rest in England. But so that lasted for 3 months, and it was in that period that I first went to Buckingham Palace to get the Distinguished Service Cross. And that was for my operations in the desert. And and then I went, then after that, of course, the whole other era was the Pacific and
Yeah,
the
okay,
rest.
but I want you to tell us in a little bit more detail about what it was like going
Well, it was
to see the King and the Queen. and
Yes,
stuff.
it was very well organized, and you'd be in these rooms situated facing their garden, and then when it came the turn of that room to, you'd line up, and then you'd walk through, and there would be the King and Queen on a sort of platform around, and then your relatives would be on the other side of the ramp where you were walking, in an area that a little orchestra band would be playing, and you come up there, and quite truthfully, as you know well, the King was not very able to talk that well. He had the stutters, and so the Queen would be the person that would really be wonderful, jovial, and smile, and give you the award, and the King would shake hands with you and congratulate you. But she was doing most of the work and finding out where you lived or where you'd been and what so, and of course the amount of time that she would spend with a person depended on how important the award was. So for my DSC, I was just there for 3 or 4 minutes. When I went back in 1945 to get the DSO and the bar to the DSC, then I suppose I was there discussing with her for 10 or 12 minutes, really going into this thing. But it was very beautifully done, and
I've seen photographs of her on these Life magazines from 1938, 1940. She was really quite beautiful in the photographs.
Oh, yes. Oh, she was. She was quite a person.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on out to the Pacific now, and I believe you went to Avengers and finally got on a carrier. So let's tell us about that.
Well, when I'd finished with this Wings for Victory, in other words, my rest period was over, I joined a squadron which was operating off the south coast of England against the coast of France in anti-shipping. And it was based at Manston, which was an RAF base on the sort of eastern side of the coast. And then they started they wanted to open another branch, and so they opened another branch for the Night Albacore at Exeter, which was on the west side of England's coast. So one could reach Le Havre and more of the Channel ports and the Channel Islands you could fly around as well. Where on the east side from Manston, you really had to go to the coast of Belgium and Netherlands, and that was a different kind of shipping area. So I went there, and that went on for about 4 or 5 months. And then I was appointed to 856, a squadron that was going to form an Avenger squadron in the States. In other words, the crews, the maintenance crews, were sent to learn about the Grumman Avenger, and young pilots that were trained in Canada would come down to join the squadron. And I was the senior pilot, in other words, the number 2. The CO was the same CO who'd been my CO in the other squadron, 841. And so we trained, and we got the Avengers, and we trained these young pilots and navigators from Canada at Squantum, outside of Boston. So that took place, and then when they were ready to take their deck landing, then we would fly down, and they would do the deck landing on a U.S. Small carrier. And then we all flew back and took I don't know whether I call it a freighter or a small liner back to England across the Atlantic. And then that I'm wrong there. No, we would then join a new small carrier that had been built in America and was due to join the British Navy. And so we would go on that, and we go into Liverpool and leave the carrier there. We would then stay there and see that the planes were unloaded, and then fly them up to Machrihanish, which was on the west coast of Scotland, to start training these young men in the thing that we'd been trained a year before in the deck landing and torpedo dropping and the rest of it. So that was what happened then.
And then how did you get out to the Pacific then?
Well, then when we got back from Squantum in outside Boston, and we went to Machrihanish, within a week of being in Machrihanish, I was then promoted to lieutenant commander and put in charge of 849 Squadron. And 849 Squadron had been a squadron on the HMS Victorious, one of the fleet carriers, which had also been at Norfolk and had some problems. And so the next thing we knew, we would fly at Machrihanish and get these young people trained in deck landing and torpedo dropping, and then we joined another carrier, another small carrier, that was going out to the Pacific, or going out actually to the Indian Ocean, to Ceylon. So the squadron went on the ship, and no flying off the ship. The deck was just loaded with planes, both Albacores and other fighter planes, and stopped at Alexandria for a couple of days, and then went right the way through, stopped at Cochin in India and unloaded in Cochin, and then flew to Coimbatore, which was a supply base in India, a supply base for squadrons in Ceylon. And so that was how we got there. And then we obviously, the first thing we had to do was to join the Victorious. So we flew the squadron onto the Victorious. Unfortunately, one of the planes in the squadron hit the deck landing officer and killed him, which was not exactly the best way of arriving on the ship. And then we were off to join the fleet, which by then we realized was going to go around to the Pacific. And on the way we had two big operations. And
Bob, maybe about every 5 minutes, just go and wave in front of that thing over there. And I think it'll stop it. Okay. Yeah, tell me about those operations.
Well, obviously, they had decided that on the way to Australia, there was some very important oil refineries in Sumatra and Java that were supplying Japan with about a third of all their gasoline. So it was decided that the fleet on the way down should try and bomb and extinguish these important places. So the first one was at Brandon, and that was not a big refinery, but it was sufficient to bomb, and we put that out of operation for a short period, I think. And then further on, we had an operation against Palembang, which was a collection of 3 different refineries, all on this river. And
Palembang, was that in Sumatra?
Palembang was in Java.
Java.
Brandon was in Sumatra.
Okay.
And so the first day of the Palembang strike, the fighter planes from the 4 carriers, leaving a Seafire squadron to protect the fleet.
And tell me what a Seafire was.
A Seafire is a Spitfire, which was a main RAF fighter, Hurricanes and then Spitfires. And a Seafire was just a Spitfire with a hook to land on a carrier. So anyway, all the airfields in Java and Sumatra were strafed early morning by the fighter planes from the 4 carriers. And then we flew across the 200 miles, across to Palembang, and with very little interruption. And we bombed, and we bombed it fairly successfully. Before this operation had taken place, we'd had an RAF officer, intelligence officer, giving us the information about the distilleries, well they were protected, and we rather pointedly said, have they got barrage balloons? And he said, no, no barrage balloons. So when we flew the 200 miles across, we suddenly saw that he was wrong. There were barrage balloons, and they were rising as we had approached. And I was leading the Avenger squadrons from Victorious, my squadron, and one from the Indomitable, which was another of the carriers. And
how many planes in all then, basically?
well, each squadron had 25 planes, but we were flying, the serviceable ones are probably about 18, so there would probably be 70 bombers in the four. And the two flights, the Indomitable and the Implacable were one group, and that was being led by somebody from Indomitable, and I was leading the Victorious and Indefatigable, that squadron. Well, we, in other words, were behind, and so we were flying over the target, and there were some fighter planes, but then the Japanese were beginning to strafe us, but not very seriously. But anyway, Lieutenant Commander Stewart, who was leading the first group, apparently had been put off by this balloon business, and he was flying around. And I had seen the target that we were given in one of the refineries, which was on the sort of northwest of it. We were arriving from the west, and I could see our target. And while Stewart was taking his two squadrons around, I decided to go and dive bomb regardless of the barrage balloons. And so we dived down through the barrage balloons and hit the target and hit it pretty well. Unfortunately, the CO of the other squadron that was following me, unfortunately, he was a regular naval squadron commander, hit the balloons and went down. Anyway, we got back to the carrier, and very little damage or loss, and landed on. And so the next day was going to be another flight across. And the weather was very bad, and it was canceled, which was probably very good, but it was then, 2 days later, it was reinstated, and so we took off, and I think I only had 12 planes that were serviceable. The others had been hit by fire and were on board, but they were not right. So this was an entirely different operation, because the Japanese had been warned, and obviously they'd made an attack on the fleet, which had resulted in the Spitfire shooting down 7 of their planes. And so when we started reaching the target, we were all jumped by Japanese fighters. And my number 2 and number 3, each side of me, were shot down. And I led the rest of them down the same way through the barrage balloons, and very successfully bombed our target. when we got back to the fleet, two of the planes that were still flying had to ditch by destroyers, and because they were unserviceable, they couldn't get the undercarriage down, or there was other reasons. So two of them, one of them was a good friend of mine who was a flight leader. He's now a vice admiral, retired now, but anyway. And he landed the plane alongside the Whelp. And the Whelp was a destroyer that the Prince was a lieutenant on. And so when he pulled the people out of the plane and helped, he gave my friend Halliday a uniform to wear, Prince Philip. And so anyway, that was fine, except of the planes that landed on the carrier, half of them were badly hit. So when it came to count the number of planes available to fly to Palembang the next day, it was decided that it really wasn't worth doing it. So they put the Palembang, the two refineries, out of operation, and they were out of operation for 3 months. And so then we went on our way to Fremantle to land there, and then around to Sydney. And after that we were the British Pacific Fleet. We call it the British Pathetic Fleet. And we were off to assist the Fifth Fleet in the Pacific.
The American Fifth Fleet?
Yeah.
Yeah. Your wingmen that got shot down, did they survive, and what eventually happened to them?
Well, the wingmen that the two crews that were each side of me, they landed safely, and one of the crews were picked up fairly soon by the Japanese and sent to Changi prison in Singapore. The other one landed more in the forest area, and they remained free for quite some time, but eventually they also were sent to Changi. So, and then there was another plane which went down in our operations against the Shakashima Gunto. And so there were 9 of my squadron were prisoners at Singapore at Changi prison. And I was then in the Admiralty. After finishing the operations in the Pacific, and I saw the cable that came in that all 9 of them had been taken out of the prison on the day the armistice was signed, and had to dig their own graves, and were killed. So that was all 9 of the squadron.
Tell me, I think you said that kamikazes became a problem out in the Pacific for you guys too. Yeah. Tell me about that.
Well, they were a problem, and they hit the Formidable first, And the Formidable, at the time they hit it, had a whole lot of planes on the deck, having gone through the arrestor hooks. They'd taxied and were parked there, and unfortunately that was a great target, and the kamikaze that hit them put all those planes on fire, and so the ship was in a bad condition. The Victorious, we were hit twice within an hour. The first one was on the fairly forward, on one of about where the elevator was down to the hangars, but the plane bounced off the deck and into the sea, and then later one was heading for the rear end of the plane, where I was standing with the deck landing officer, because I was worried about some of our planes coming in. And so I saw this thing coming down, and I dived under and down, and running to get under shelter, I hit my left foot. I hit one of these shuttles, and I've never recovered it since. It's chipped a bone. But anyway, when we then had gone into Ulithi, or one of the ports where the American fleet was also being harbored, the engineers, they were very interested in the how these British fleet carriers were built, because we had steel decks, and where the planes were stored down below decks, that hangar space was also completely surrounded in steel walls. So no kamikaze got through the deck, whereas in the American wooden decks, some of the kamikazes penetrated down into the hangar and exploded their bombs down in the hangar and did a lot of damage to the planes and the ship. So whether they were ideas of building the same carriers. Now the reason that steel framework was wonderful, but of course it must have also taken quite a lot of the speed off those British fleet carriers. In other words, it was very difficult for the captains of those ships to get much above 30 knots, whereas the Americans would be doing 35 to 40 knots, and this was one problem you had to face.
And the DSO that you received, that was for your Palembang
Yeah.
missions?
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit now about the DINAH Shore tournament here in the desert, and how that came about and how you got DINAH to be a part of it.
Well, we were very active in Colgate Palmolive, testing new products, and this was an exercise that the Procter & Gamble did just as frequently as we did, and we would find out how their test plan was doing by calling on homes in that town or city that they were testing products, and they would obviously do the same for us. However, I would go out on these. They were important enough for me then I was in charge of the household products division, where most of the new products were taking place. So I would go out and go to the homes in that test town or test city to see for myself on the questionnaire that the young lady who accompanied us was taking the questions and answers, just what was happening. And I came away, I think it was one test town we were in for I think it was for some kind of a product for stain removal. I can't remember. I think it was called Proof. And anyway, we're going to these homes, and we'd call on about 20 to 25 a day, and we'd be there for 2 days, let's say, and there'd be other members of the new product team and the rest. And anyway, I came away with the feeling that our advertising for some of our current products was not getting through to younger consumers, young women consumers, whereas we had a fairly solid base of older households using Palmolive soap or Colgate dental cream, but the newer products were not doing that well. And so it really came down to, was it the advertising or was it the product? And we found that in the case of one product, the advertising was diverting the household from doing what it was supposed to do. And that was our Ajax Scourer, which we were doing quite well with. But we had a campaign which said, use Ajax Scourer on your sink and you fly out of the kitchen fast. And we found that the housewife resented being told to fly out of the kitchen fast. In other words, she decided she was in the kitchen after breakfast or cleaning up, and she was going to make certain that she stayed there and that the husband knew that she was in the kitchen doing all the jobs. So that kind of thing was quite enlightening, and we inquired, well, how do we get to the younger consumers? Immediately we sort of looked at other successful products, and we found that a lot of them were based on sporting events, whether it was football or baseball or this or that. And from the women's side, it was tennis, and we thought, well, what's wrong with women's golf? Because men's golf then had quite a bit of following and the rest of it. And so we decided to get all the information on women's golf. And it really was frightening how badly the women's golf was looked after. They were playing on inferior kind of courses. The money was ridiculous, so low. And there was a group who were obviously extremely able and extremely photogenic and possible of helping. So we decided that we would try and get the backing of some kind of a women's sporting event. And we couldn't find any that we wanted to take over. So we thought, well, we better build our own. So we decided that golf was the one that needed the best support. And that's how we started. And I had tried to see if we could get. We were quite a big user of media then, and so we went to the main networks and said, can we get in? I want to get this thing done in the spring of next year. It was in 1970. It was then getting on for September. And they said, no, we're all booked for that period. So we managed to get another outfit who would get us coverage. And I went out with this fellow to play golf, and he'd also asked a girl golfer, and he'd asked also DiMaggio to play. And so we started playing, and a very, very attractive young girl. But Joe DiMaggio and I were shaking our heads and sort of saying, well, I mean, we were out driving her by, 20 yards or so, and and I thought, my God, if this is a standard or the average, then we're in trouble. So then I think we decided that we'd have to make some fairly strong scores that they had to prove before they could enter our tournament. And we sort of decided, in conjunction with some of the women players, that there would have to be a winner of a tournament, or in the first three of a recent tournament in the last 3 months or so. And we added up to, there were 40 women that that qualified on that basis. And then we thought, well, everybody was having, from Sammy Davis to everybody else were sponsoring a male tour. So we said, well, we better get somebody female to sponsor our tour. We had already had Dinah Shore doing a weekly, 5 days a week program called Dinah's Place, which was really her cooking and things like that, and she'd get guests in. So I said, well, why don't we try Dinah Shore? So we got Dinah in and said, would you sponsor our new tournament we're having for ladies? And she said, fine. And she said, it's a tennis tournament. I said, no, it's not. She said, oh. I said, it's a golf tournament. She says, well, I don't play golf. I play tennis, and she's quite a tennis player. I said, well, we'll just have to teach her. And but she really, put all her heart into it. And then there was a sales meeting of the household product division, the salesman, and I said, well, let's introduce this idea to them. So we got 3 of the current players, with Marlene Haggy Vossler, Donna Capone, and another player, I forget the name at the moment. And so after all the talk of the divisional managers and the rest of it, then suddenly these 3 girls emerged with clubs and had plastic golf balls that they started hitting into the audience. And when the audience saw that there were dollar notes in the plastic balls, they became much more alert and awake. And so that was fine. So then I said, right, well, we're not going to go down to Florida where there were tournaments. I said, we're going to try spring, and we're going to try it in the Palm Springs area. And I said, we've now got to go down and get a place to play. So I went down with my fellow who was my PR, public relations, and we called on 3 places, Indian Wells, Bermuda Dunes, and one other. And Indian Wells said, well, we'd love it, but we've got the Bob Hope. We're the main place for the Bob Hope next spring. And we can't do them both well, so we went to Bermuda Dunes, and the captain of the club, or president of the club, said, well, that's an idea. We can give you a dressing room for the girls, but of course you've got to have our members have got to go off before them, play before them. And I said, no, that's no point. If that happens, it's not a main tournament. So then Max Genet called me, and he just started in Mission Hills, and so he drove me around Mission Hills Golf Course, which was less than just a year old, and I liked the course, and I said to Max, I said, now what about the fee? And he thought that he would have to pay a fee. And I said, no, we'll pay the fee. And he said, well, you can have the whole clubhouse and everything. He said, for the whole of the 7 days, you can do what you like. It'll be your club and your golf course. And so that's how the thing started. And then we made another mistake. The first tournament we had marquees out on the lawns for the sort of final gala dinner, and just before the thing was due to start, a wind came up and the chandeliers were blowing, and we'd have to take them down, which we did. And we said, never again do we do the night entertainment outside. So,
Yeah,
so we learned some
spring here in
lessons.
the desert. I guess, in fact, I think my wife she was working, I think, for the Chamber of Commerce or something like that. And she was there at that time and remembers the palm trees blowing down. And
Oh, boy.
it was really something. But obviously, it ended up being their marquee
Yeah.
tournament, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's then of course the Spa Hotel put in their banqueting hall and the rest of it, and then we were able to first time we, after this washout, after the second tournament, we got a place at the Gene Autry. And then the third time we went to a ballroom that the Desert Hospital had. And that was just temporary because they were shutting that down. And so it was about the fourth tournament that we went to the Spa. We opened a little English bar and put dartboards in and some other typical English things in there, and that was a good meeting place.
Who were some of the celebrities that played, like in that first tournament or so, and how did you get them?
Well, that was one of the things that DINAH did, of course. She knew most of them, and we had the first year or two, we had probably as good a representative of film stars and actors that we'd ever get. There wasn't anybody that I can name that we didn't get. I mean, we got the Sinatra, we got everybody that was anybody in those days, and of course, Bob Hope, he would play, and and that went on, and we kept them again with DINAH right the way through until really after we'd given after the 10 years, and our friends Nabisco had taken over. They had an entirely different idea of who they wanted to ask, and they had more. We had customers, but we had special customers, and they went in for almost all customers.
Yeah, I think that it's still like that.
Yeah.
I remember I came here in 1970, and probably at one of those first tournaments, I remember going out to Mission Hills and saw Jack Benny walking down the steps, you know, and it was kind of, you would see those people all over, yeah. Okay, I'll tell you what, let's take a little break. I'm going to turn this other camera around. Why don't you just hit the pause button there, just push the...
Hit that again, so it says pause.
Okay, thank you, David. Any questions from you guys in the audience? Bob?
I'd like to go out there way back to the abdication of the Duke of Windsor. How did the people react to that? I mean, you being a citizen there, was it, you know, did everybody talk about it, or were they shocked, or when he married
Simpson.
What's her name?
Simpson.
Mrs. Simpson.
Simpson.
He was extremely popular, and I think there was an awful lot of sympathy for his brother, who had to take over. And we mentioned his brother, who and Elizabeth, his wife. The brother was not designed to be king. He had a bad. He couldn't talk very well. He was very shy, and there was a lot of sympathy for people who knew them both. That the Prince of Wales abdicating, they didn't like that because they felt it was unfair. He'd done a pretty good job, and the thing was blamed on his marriage to Mrs. Simpson. But you know, they didn't like the political side of it. Baldwin was a very strong prime minister, and they felt that that the Prince of Wales, by marrying this woman, had really put a gun to his head that he had to abdicate, and so it was a very mixed. You know, a lot of people felt very sad at him going. He'd been a good Prince of Wales, or he'd been a good king for the, you know, uncrowned, but he was king after his father died for a time. And so this, you know, he was as a young prince, you know, in the First World War, he was out there in France and the rest with the troops. He was only a kid of 17 or 18 at the time. And over here, he was popular in the States.
Can I ask a question? Have the British subjects' view of royalty changed over the years?
Yes, it's changed. I mean, there are a lot of people speaking against it, you know, that why is there a royalty? Why are we spending all this money on royalty things, and there's a lot of that. But the funny thing is, the minute the things happen, the crowds and the population are as keen as ever to attend. Then, of course, the Princess Diana thing shook them. I mean, the way that the present Prince of Wales had acted, and that was a blow to the Queen. But I think that has been recovered. The Queen has been much more intelligent and democratic in many ways, and Prince Philip not Prince Philip, Prince Charles has, I think, proved to be very able in what he now does, because he has a lot of responsibilities. So I think that yes, there has been a drop in the acceptance of the royalty, but I think generally it still is a part of the British society that is important.
Harry?
The reason I say this because just like he just got through saying, if that would have happened today, you know, the Duke of Windsor, would that have happened? On my house, when I was in London, I picked up a book, autobiography of the Duchess of Windsor, and it was very interesting. And I didn't realize that she was actually exiled. You know, I mean, they were exiled. He was when he went to Bermuda, I think he was the Viceroy of Bermuda or something like that. And during the war, they traveled to France, and they did the war effort, but never went back to England.
Right.
Is that true?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Also, too, there's a kind of a coincidence here too. The Duchess' first husband was Winfield, and he was naval aviator number 20. We have that upstairs. And that's how she fell in love with him, because of the uniform.
Yeah.
He's also the one that set up North Island in San Diego. It's quite a story.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Harry?
You must have had a lot of pressure as a boy growing up with a father who was as talented as your dad was. How'd that come off, where you had to compete with his gold medal in the Olympics, his golf, and you know, you're being a jolly young English swimmer?
Well, I didn't really have to compete, because you know, I was away in boarding school, or from the age of 7 in boarding school right the way through to Cambridge, age 18. And we were only not in school for 3 months of the year, if that. So the chance of me having any jealousy or anything about my father would never occur. We were always glad to see him on vacations, and he still, as I say, he had a way with him that a charm that you couldn't really disagree with. For instance, although he was divorced from my mother in 1927, he would give her a monthly check, and he would give it to her personally, and he also would, on her birthday in February, always buy her lunch and give her a dozen red roses, whatever you like. So there was no sort of conflict in the family, and she was quite willing to let him take my sister and me out if we wanted to go. I loved going out to the golf, and then of course the pro there, Archie Compston, would give me lessons, just because I was his son. And, I mean, he would just say, all right, here's a number 4 iron. Go around the whole course with a 4 iron. And I'd say, how can I putt with a 4? He said, you find out.
Now, you, at some point, met a woman and got married. How did that happen?
I was in the States, and I was with Colgate, but I was in charge of their export, and I was traveling down to Central America, South America, Far East, and pretty lonely. And I got a call from a friend of mine in England saying, there's a girl coming over who's got a play coming on Broadway. She doesn't know much about New York. Will you look after her? And I said, certainly. So along comes Glynis Johns, who then was quite a high British film star, actress. And so she had rented an apartment, and not a very nice one anyway. So we would go out to dinner, and then they were rehearsing, and then they had the first shows were on in Boston, and I would go out there and I'd stay there. And eventually, I think we both were lonely, and I think that's why we got married, quite truthfully.
We're up to a couple of seconds left.
Okay. David, thank you very much.
Right.
Okay. All right, we'll switch over to that other camera, and then we'll go on out to there. So you can just hit the pause button there. Yeah, that'll be.
Then we were told the next day that we said, push out. We don't know what you're going to run into, but let's get on over there to Shuri. Well, Shuri Castle was sitting here, and there's 2 big radio towers here. And my platoon was to be the right of the radio towers as we were going, and we slipped up and got up on top of it, and here was a platoon of Nips asleep on the back side of it. So we had a heyday, but we were the first ones up on the Shuri Castle area, and while we were there waiting on everybody else to come, I looked back to my back of me there while I was once, and here come this company through, and I looked at the front of it, and it was a boy he was a captain, but he'd gone in the Marine Corps. He was ahead of me in school, and he had his company out of the 1st Marines, and I hollered down at him and told him, I said, it's safe, you can go on around. He'd come out of the Marine Corps, and he was a lawyer, and he was a judge at Fairfield for years. This fellow by the name of Harry Ziegler. Yeah, but it was fun seeing him come by. So you see a person now and then, you know, out of your own area.
Harry Ziegler. Now we got a guy, one of my volunteers that does interviews. His name's Harry Ziegler. I don't know if he's related or not. So this is in Southern Illinois, where.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to ask him.
Yeah. But we went in then. We didn't get into the area, the exact place where the castle was, because this was our area to go. We weren't included over there. And from there we just went on south as we advanced, and as they retreated until we got to the end of the island, and on June the 21st, the last day of combat, on Hill 79, that was ours. Curly had told me, he said, Phil, he said, we get this last hill, he said, you can tell your platoon that you're not going to be the front. You've been it all the time. I'm going to send Duncan and Peterson, and you just be released. So I tell him, and we're all happy. Well, he calls all the officers together, and the mortar section and the machine.
That maybe you can point to certain
Well, there's really much to point to.
Well, I know it's not. Okay, well, I'll do it.
Yeah,
Then. Let's
okay.
talk about it. Okay, this is our albacore here. I guess the torpedo would be slung down in here underneath the point?
Well, underneath the central part, in there,
Right in there, yeah.
yeah.
And how many in the crew?
Would be three, be the pilot, then the navigator observer, then at the tail end would be the gunner, air gunner.
What kind of a gun did it have, do you recall?
Max out, just a machine gun.
Uh-huh. Okay. And what would the airspeed be?
Airspeed wouldn't be much more than 150 knots.
It was a biplane, I see, but it was enclosed as opposed to the
Yes,
swordfish.
it was really, it was from obviously the Fairey, the makers of the swordfish, and it really wasn't much different in everything except the closed pilot's cabin and also for the navigator and air gunner. The rest of it was fairly similar. The speeds might have been 10 knots more, that's about all. It was very maneuverable. The wings would carry the flares when we were dropping them on both sides, and you could get about 15 flares on each wing, so you carried about 30 flares, and you carried bombs where you would have the torpedo.
And it was designed to be on a ship.
Yes.
But we'll get into this later. I know you ended up in North Africa where that's why you drop flares and bombs and stuff instead of
But you can
torpedoes.
still see that there's a hook coming out by the tail there, to the left of there. That's a hook that'll go down on the carrier.
The tail hook, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, let's go on back here.
Okay.
Then.
You want them both on?
Yeah, you can turn that one. Okay, thank you, David. Any questions from you guys in the audience? Bob?
Yeah, I'd like to go, way back, to the abdication of the Duke of Windsor. How did the people react to that? I mean, you being a citizen there, was it, did everybody talk about it, or were they shocked, or when he married, what's her name? Whittier? Simpson.
He was extremely popular, and I think there was an awful lot of sympathy for his brother who had to take over. And we mentioned his brother and the British Prime Minister. And we've got all those destroyers, early destroyers in the first one. And then I think that
Now, when you were coming from England on that
Georgic.
the Georgic,
yeah.
do you want to use this, or do you want to use it, or do you want me to?
Well,
Well, anyway.
Anyway.
Okay. I know you were around the Suez Canal, but where did
Yeah.
you come from? How did you get to the Suez Canal?
come up the Red Sea.
This is the Red Sea down here.
Up
then.
here, up to the canal, and Port Suez is right there, right at the beginning of the canal, this side, right at the end.
Right there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's Port Suez and Port Tewfik, and those ships couldn't go up the canal.
Okay.
So then there was a railway that went alongside it.
On the which side? This side?
This side.
Uh-huh.
And that would go right the way up
Okay.
to Port Said.
Okay, Port Said, yeah.
Yeah. And then across, we were at Alexandria.
Yeah. But where did you see the the Formidable? Was that the one that was hit?
Yes,
Where
yeah.
did you see that? You
It
said
was down towards the end. They were down, they were...
in the canal?
No, they were in the canal. They were
They
in
were
the
in the
canal,
canal.
coming
Okay.
down the canal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where you saw
Yeah.
it.
That's right.
Okay, so then you went to Cairo, did you say?
No, I went to Alexandria.
which, let's see, I don't know where Alexandria.
So it would be one of those entrance.
Oh, it's on one of these.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then decay of the base was just to the left of where you see the Nile, just there, yes, the decay of base was there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where did your missions go to, pretty much?
Well, see, all along that coast where you got it there were the airfields, which were just sand, nothing done to them, and when we were advancing, you would go to the next one, and when you were retreating, sometimes you'd take off at night on one airfield, and you'd land at another one when you were retreating nearer to Alexandria. So they were available.
Okay, on Operation Chocolate, now where did basically...
Then we flew down to an airport near Cairo, around there, about there, yeah. And then we flew all the way down through for 200 miles to about there, let's say. And then we flew up where the you haven't got Tobruk on there. Well, Tobruk was...
Between Alamein and Benghazi, I guess.
Yeah, there's Tobruk.
Up in... Oh, no, it's over here.
Tobruk there.
Okay, so you must have... You probably flew maybe down into here and then up over to Tobruk?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we were farther down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you were behind the enemy lines there.
That's right.
Down
yeah.
in that
yeah.
chocolate place there.
Yeah.
And then, whereabout was it that you spotted the Germans, that whole German armored column?
That would be down here, going across.
They were trying to get to El Alamein?
They were trying to get through to Cairo.
To Cairo, okay.
And of course, what happened when they got down, and then they couldn't go any further, so they again tried to go up, but they got beaten back, and then they retreated. Yeah.
And then Malta is over there, up right by Tunis.
That's right.
So that's where you ended up then.
Ended up there, yeah.
To the Navy hangar now.
Yeah.
Okay, David, we're out here in the Indian Ocean and around Singapore and stuff. Now, what direction did you come from England to get, say, into the Indian Ocean area?
Well,
So you had gone through Australia, did you?
yes.
Okay, so it would have been, you probably would have come, you can,
Well, we came this.
here's Australia's over here.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
okay.
But we came from Ceylon, or Sri Lanka as it is now. So we came from there.
Okay.
And on the island, the other side of it was Colombo, and that's where we joined the Victorious in Colombo. Then we sailed from there and all the way down, and we would bomb Brandon when we were off Sumatra here, and then when we got to here, the Palembang was on the other side of Java.
Okay.
On the coast, about there, yeah.
And where was your ship?
Out here.
Around there.
Yeah.
So you had to go all the way across
Yes.
Java.
Yes.
You hit it.
200 miles.
Yeah. And the other up around Sumatra. This one up here. That first.
Was up. Yeah. Brandon was a little further up there. About there.
Right
yes.
in there.
Yeah.
Okay. So that one you didn't. You kind of was.
Well,
You didn't have to go across. You were out in the sea.
Yeah,
Pretty much
that's
the
right.
time. Okay. And then when you left Java, then where did you guys go?
To Fremantle, which
Oh,
is
that's when
down
you went to
Australia.
Australia. Yeah. So you would have come actually from, you came through India on your way from England when you first came to the.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we went into
Come-
Cochin, which was on the west coast of India,
Okay.
and from there we went to Ceylon, which is
Oh, okay. I see. And then down this direction.
yeah,
Okay, and then so then you went over to us to Fremantle. Did you say?
Fremantle down, and then went around Australia into Sydney.
To Sydney. Yeah.
Yeah.
Over on the other side.
Yeah.
And then when you left there to go back to England,
Well, I went then.
or where'd you go then?
Well, then we were in the I'm going to say where the islands and the rest of it. We went through the Panama Canal to
Oh.
get to England.
Oh, did you? Okay. So
Yeah.
what about back around this
Yeah.
way? Okay, good. Let's go on over to the. Okay, this is. I guess it's painted pretty much like the British, just painted up about like yours was.
Yeah, grey.
Uh huh. And this one had a three-man crew also.
Yeah, three-man crew.
Okay, so you had the pilot and the
Yeah,
navigator and the
air gunner at the end.
air
Yeah.
gunner, yeah. How did you get into the pilot's seat?
On the wing.
I'm on the wing,
Yeah.
yeah. And you could have a torpedo in there,
Yeah, that's right.
or bombs.
Or bombs, yeah.
What size bombs would you carry usually?
Usually we carried about 8 250 pounds.
Okay, let's turn around this way. Yeah. Okay. 8.
8 250 pounds.
How did it handle the plane?
Very easy. Good plane, no problems.
So you almost used it like a dive bomber, though,
Oh,
when
yeah.
you went. And
Right.
you always think of it as, when we think of the TBM or TBF, we're going slow and
torpedo.
low
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
drop of the torpedo,
Yeah,
but
right.
it worked well as a dive bomber
Oh, yeah.
too.
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
Was it hard to pull out of a dive?
No, no. Very good, very good plane.
I never realized until I had seen one here how large they
They
are.
are big, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah. And with a big wing, I guess
Yeah.
it made it pretty stable as far
Yeah,
as.
yeah.
Yeah. Let's walk around, Harry, and keep in contact with your crewmen at all.
Well, there is a squadron meeting every year, and it's usually in November in London. And normally I'm not in London in November, and so it was only the year before last that there was one that tied up early November. There was the inauguration of a memorial on the embankment to the Fleet Air Arm. Always before that we'd been part of the Navy, but we had our own commemoration. So we were going over with that, and we decided that we would suggest to the guys that were running it that they had the 849 squadron get together the same week. So we had that.
That your two crewmen, are they still alive?
No, the air gunner is not. Craig, the I don't know whether Willett, who was my last, I don't think he is, but no, I'm sure he's not alive.
And how long did you, when you came in 1970, was that the first time you come to the desert here, or had you been here before?
No, first time. Yeah.
And you live here how long have you lived here full time now? Well, pretty
winter,
much full time.
yes. Ever since '79, full time.
and you, in the summertime, you go back to Nantucket.
That's right, yeah.
David,
Yep.
thank you so much.
Okay,
So
good,
good to have
good.
you.
Pleasure.
Interesting story,
Yeah.
as always. Thank you, Harry.
They keep on bringing up that Toronto, and that when the British they had the shallow torpedoes, and of course they keep on bringing it up. That's where the Japanese got the idea of the shallow torpedoes for Pearl Harbor, because of what the British did in Toronto.
Yeah.
Have you heard about that?
No, I hadn't heard about that.
Okay. Also, another question is, what was the feeling of the? What was your feeling of the people when the hood went down? Was there an? Yeah, I know. I know that the Bismarck was the largest German, but was the Hood the largest? Like he says, the largest battleship.
Well, I think it was the largest battleship, but it was really a leftover from World War I, the Hood.
Yeah, I think I saw that in Life magazine.
Yeah.
I was just reading about it.
Yeah, there's only 3 survivors. Imagine that.
Yeah.
There's only 3 survivors.
So where did they take their hit, or do you remember?
It went in, and for some reason it sort of went over its hard shell. It must have gone in almost into, let's say, the kitchen area, whatever you like. But it was quite a lucky shot. It was not expected that.
Armored piercing shell.
Yeah.
Is that what they call them? Or?
Yeah.
Well, but probably, I was saying, is it hit a vulnerable spot
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the ship where it maybe would have stopped.
That's right.
How about do you remember, when they chased the Graf Spee
Yeah.
into Montevideo Harbor?
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do. Yeah.
That was quite a chase, wasn't
Quite a
it?
chase. Yes. Yeah.
And then they let, I guess, they let him in there, and they got, I guess the crew got asylum or something like that. Then I think the commander, I forget his name, committed suicide.
Yeah.
And then they scuttled it.
Scuttled the ship. They just went out a port and then scuttled it there. Yeah.
I'm going